In this tutorial, we're going to create this diamond box shape and texture map it. I'm going to start by creating a polygon cylinder. I'll click and drag the footprint, let go, and then drag up. I'm going to go to the attribute editor or channel box, and I'm going to change the subdivisions from axis 20 to 6 because I want a 6-sided image. Now, in order to get the point at the top, I'll right click and choose vertex. I'll select all the points, and I'm going to go to edit mesh, merge to center. Now I've got that tool on my shelf here, and it's an orange circle that's cut up like a pie. Now I'm going to tip my view so that I can grab the vertex at the bottom and drag that down to give it the point shape. And I'll return to my object mode. I'm going to click on Delete by Type History, and I'm going to go to Modify, Freeze, Transform. Next, we're going to add a texture map. I'll right-click, choose Assign New Material, Arnold, AI Standard Surface. I want to put the built-in checkerboard pattern so that I can map my texture proportionally. I'm going to go to the hypershade, and in the hypershade I'll go to the base color tab, follow it out, and I'll click on the default built-in checker pattern. If you don't see your texture readily, hit 6 on the keyboard and the pattern will show up. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to choose a face that is perpendicular to an axis. So I'm going to use the z-axis to plot my texture. I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose face. I'll select this face and then the bottom face. I'll hold down the space bar and I'm going to go to edit mesh and I'm going to choose extract. Now I might hit 5 on the keyboard at this point so I can see my geometry a little better. When you reselect these faces you had just extracted, you'll see they are brown. I'm going to right click and choose object mode and reselect it. Now that I've separated those polygons out, I'm going to use Z-planar mapping. I'll hold down my space bar, I'll go to UV, and I'm going to go to planar mapping and the attributes. Now in here you want to choose Z, but also make sure you choose keep image width height ratio, and that'll maintain the proportions of the UV map to these surfaces even though they are slanted, not completely perpendicular or horizontal. I'll click apply. And you can see now that it's mapped it pretty nicely on our geometry. Now I'm going to go to my UV editor as well just to confirm this. And if I was just to turn that default checkerboard pattern off for a moment, which is this little icon with the mountains and the sun, you can see there's our first set of faces. Now we can't go around and do the rest of them the same way because they are not perpendicular to the grid. So I'm going to return to my object mode. I'm going to select those two poly faces and I'm going to go to my top view and I'm going to hit W. Now I want my pivot to be at the very tip of the piece we just texture mapped. So I'm going to delete the other 5 faces. And once I select that, I can click on my center pivot. I'll zoom in closely. And I want to hold down D on the keyboard and V. And I'm going to drag on the Z-axis and snap it to the very tip. Very important that you do snap that because now we're going to generate 5 more with the texture maps already on. With the shape selected, I'll hold down the space bar. I'll go to Edit, Duplicate Special, and to the Attributes. On the y-axis, rotate 60 degrees because there are 6 faces, and I'm going to generate 5 more copies because we already have one. So I'll put in 5. I'll hit return to set the number, and I'll hit apply, and there are all my faces. Now I can go in and I can pull them out. They're all on top of each other if I'm in my UV map. So I'm going to hide the checkerboard. And I'm going to start by right-clicking and choosing UV shell. I'll select one and I'll move it out. And one by one I'm going to drag them all out, all 6 of them, and then I'll line them up side by side after I've gotten them where I want them to be. Now that I have the faces all spread out, all the UV maps are separate, all 6, I'm going to select the geometry in the viewport, hold down the space bar, I'll go to Mesh and Combine. Now I want to line these up as closely as possible the way they relate in sequence from the top view. So once again, I'll right-click inside the UV editor, I'll choose UV shell, and I'll select this one, and then I'll select that one. And what I'll do is I'll put this here. I'll go to the next one. I'll drag that end to end. The next one is this one. So I'll just pull this to get it out of the way a bit. Select this one. On the x-axis, drag it over. And finally this one. I'm going to, in my geometry, object mode, and now I'll right click and choose UV shell. I'll marquee select them because they're separate pieces still. I'll put that into the checkerboard area so that now I can scale it so that when I generate my UV map I can bring it into Photoshop. And I'll turn off the checkerboard so we can see what we've got here. So you can see we've got our UV map laid out pretty nicely. I'll go back to the object mode for my geometry, deselect, and select again. Now I'll go to Image, UV Snapshot, browse to my project folder, hit Save. Make sure it's set for ping and whatever resolution size you want for your package design. Hit Apply and Close. Now before I go into Photoshop, I want to tie these together. They're just simply merged. There are seams here where all these pieces are still separate. So I'll go into my perspective view and I'll right click and I'll choose Vertex. I'll select that point. I'll click on Merge and Center. I'll hit 4 so I can see through this and get it done a little quicker. I'll select the next series, hit G or click back on the tool on my shelf. And all of these that are potentially open still, I'll marquee select and hit G or click on Merge to Center. Now I'll return back to my object mode. Now I'm going to add the one last thing before I go into Photoshop, and that will be the bevel. So I'll right click and I'll choose Edge. And pretty much every edge on here has got to have a bevel so that it looks like creased cardboard. So I'll marquee select the whole model. The edges will turn brown. I'll hit 4 on the keyboard so I can see what's really happening here. And I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and I'm going to choose Bevel, and I'm going to the Attributes. Now at this point it's really pretty subjective, but I've set the width to 0.05 and then just 2 segments, and I'll hit Apply. So if I hit 5 on the keyboard, or 6 if I want to see my checker pattern, you can see now we've got those edges beveled and they look like a creased cardboard box. Next we'll go into Photoshop and we'll put our texture on. I've opened up my PNG in Photoshop and you can see the UV map's a little faint, so I'll just give it a little bit more oomph here, locking down the transparency and then putting a color into it. I'll just make it blacker. And now I'm going to add a new layer. And I'll just pick a random color here. At this point you would be putting your design in. I'll pick a color that's got some presence to it so you can see the contrast. And I'll change the layer order so you can see there's our map. And you can see that they're all lined up. Now just to illustrate that it is proportional to the model and nothing will be distorted, I'm going to get my text tool and I'm going to use black. And I'll click inside my file, cap lock, and I'm just going to put art here. I'll scale that up. And I'll put it on one of the faces just randomly in position. And I'll go to my layers and I'm going to rasterize. Now at this point you're developing your own texture, but this will illustrate how successful this will work for you. Hold down the option, click and drag to make my texture. Now I've got my texture map and we'll go back into Maya. I'm going to turn off the UV map. I'll hit Command S to save. Save it as a PSD. I'll return to Maya. I'll right click, go to Object Mode, right click, Material Attributes. I'm going to right click on the word color and choose Bright Connection. And I'll follow the color tab out, go to File, locate my texture map and place it. Now you can see what I did was I've got my text backwards. So I'm going to go into the UV editor, and what we're going to see momentarily is that I could have done this beforehand, but I can do it afterwards as well. So the text is backwards. If I were to go into the UV editor and I went to View Shaded, you'll see they're all red. I'm going to right click, I'm going to choose UV Shell, I'll marquee select all of them, and I'll go to Modify and I'll choose Flip. You can see now that they're blue, and you can see the text is all where it should be. Now if I wanted to, I'd get my Move tool and I could tweak each of these individually or collectively as I'm doing now. And that's pretty much how you would develop an unusual geometric shape that isn't a default cube or sphere or primary cylindrical shape.